Welcome to the webinar. We are very pleased to have with us today Sultan Inab, Director of Engineering at Kronos Incorporated. Sultan has over 26 years in the IT industry and has held various team and leadership roles in software architecture, performance engineering, and software product development for SaaS and cloud-based solutions. He is responsible for delivering highly performing human capital software solutions such as workforce management. He runs Kronos' global performance engineering practices and the performance engineering COE. Sultan is going to discuss how, as a market leader, Kronos has been able to further differentiate from their competition by shifting performance to the center of their culture. Sultan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone on the phone. Thanks for taking the time to come to this webinar. As Chris alluded to, we are going to go and talk to you about how we were able to change our culture a little bit to be more of a performance-based culture. Not because of anything that we wanted to do as a performance team. It's just because the demand in the marketplace and the competition and everything is changing around us. As performance engineers around the world, you know the challenge of being called a performance tester. That's a very narrow vision, very narrow description of what needs to be accomplished to deliver well-performing, highly scalable solutions to the marketplace. And as you all know as well, performance engineering team is usually the smallest number of people at any software company that you worked at. Those are the known facts that you deal with when you work in a software company that has hundreds and hundreds of developers. Usually you have a very small set of those engineers supported by a very small set of performance engineers. So before we dive into that, we want to talk about why we actually set on this vision and why we wanted to actually move the culture. What's the reason behind it? It's really very simple. There's a value of doing performance engineering early in the development life cycle. And this slide here, I'm going to try to demonstrate to you what that really means. In any development life cycle, you see that there's the architecture first, and before that, of course, you have the product requirements and so on and so forth. Then you design the product, you code it, test it, and push it to production. Just a standard way of developing code and pushing it out to the market. There was something wrong with this model because performance does not get any attention until the end, or until you get into the performance testing cycle, which is very late in the game, and typically, you don't have enough time to go through everything you need to do as a performance engineer or as a performance tester. So the ideal time on this particular line to do performance engineering work is very early in the cycle, preferably at the architecture level. So with that, you get a lot of value, and your value will definitely decrease as in terms of testing value as you develop more code and you move more and more into your release cycle. And with that is basically what we're trying to communicate here as an industry partner with all of you guys. I feel your pain. That's why I developed this little slide in here to communicate to my senior folks around me who make those decisions about when do you inject performance into the development cycle and why it's important to do it early in the cycle. So this helped me articulate that message and drive it home by actually putting this chart on top of that. Based on my lower than what you have seen, but my experience has told me that very few people out there actually do performance engineering at the architecture level. With the wave of the cloud and high competition and everybody's moving to digital, people start realizing, oh, I need to pay attention to this. And you can see that roughly about 10% are in the maturing area on the chart. And a lot of us in the market, we are still learning. And that's learning at a very high cost. I think you would agree with me, a lot of us who are in the performance space or who are in development in general, you know that performance does not get any attention until you start testing. And that is very late in the cycle. So I give it a 70%, but I believe some of you may actually agree with me. It's a lot higher than that. God forbid, you go into production without any performance testing, and you will be in the suffering category, which based on my experience, about 15% of software companies out there, they cannot afford to do performance, then they rely on, okay, well, I'm going to put it in production and see what happens, right? So that is something I think we want to avoid as performance professionals in the marketplace at any cost, and advise our folks around us and the people who make the decision to pull performance as early as possible in the cycle. So performance engineering or performance testing, right, need to work and to work well. In order to make it work, you need to provide tools and you need to provide strategies. And we picked Dynatrace to help us make this happen. The way we did that is we brought in Dynatrace and basically trained developers and architects to be the primary user of the Dynatrace to do early performance profiling. And Dynatrace made it so easy for me to actually be able to transition some of the development teams and transition the work that I do at a very early stage to the developers, because there are too many of them. I could not support them with the small team that I have. And my ratio today is 22 developers to 1 performance engineer. Impossible to be able to cover all of that work that's coming at us if you don't train the developers to do it. So Dynatrace made it easy for me to do that. So with Dynatrace, we put this program in place we call it Rollout Dynatrace. And we set 3 goals. We want to be effective. We want to push on the performance agenda. And we want to provide the teams around us and ourselves time to innovate. So let's talk about effectiveness. So how did the tool help us be more effective? So what it did, it unlocked this combined and collective brain power that developers have and performance engineers have, and they start collaborating more closely. How so? Because the tool itself provides you with these fact-based results. They are objective, they're rational, they make sense, they're intuitive, they're very easy to use, and there is no question that, okay, this method is hot, or that's where I'm spending my time in the code. There wasn't that pushback or the traditional pushback, and some of you know this, that developers typically try to push back and say, well, you're not having your facts straight as Mr. Performance Tester. Maybe your test scenario is incorrect, or you pushed it beyond what it's supposed to be pushed at. You get all those all the time, those are traditional arguments. Those arguments, they're not there anymore. The tool was able to remove that for us. And the communication, of course, falls into place. Now you have a single tool, right, and it's a single common language. So developers don't speak a different language than performance engineers and vice versa. So everybody's looking at the same pure path, looking at the same hot method, and seeing it in a very intuitive manner. So there is no that ambiguity that, okay, your test scenario caused me to cause issues. Well, my test scenario does not, inject or cause you to have a sequel that repeats itself 11,000 times, right? And look, I'm doing a single user test here, and I see 11,000 hits to your sequel. What's going on with that? So you didn't even have to say those kind of words at all. They can see it for their own. And now, better than ever, they actually can do it and find it without having the performance engineer to be there to tell them there's something wrong with their code. That's the beauty of it. And of course, that's more efficient. Now it takes them, very few seconds or minutes at most to actually find that obvious issue with their code. And they don't have to go through the performance cycle or the performance engineer to tell them that they have a runaway loop, right? So the tool tells them that, and of course, you're going to reduce your cost tremendously because you just cut out this 3, 4, in some cases, 6 months of performance, development cycle of back and forth of performance issues, and they're not clear on what's going on with them and how to fix them. So again, the message of this slide is really, there's a common language, there's an objective opinion. It's not the performance team said this and you said that, it's just the tool tells you the facts. So now about performance, why we kind of said performance, because we want to treat our performance as an innate feature of the product. It's not just testing, It's not a testing event. It's not doing it early in the cycle. It's not doing it late in the cycle. There's something to be said about engineering the performance into the product. And you couldn't do that if you didn't have the tools to enable you to do that, or at least start pointing you in the right direction. For example, the example I just gave you about the repetitive SQL for a single user that's repeating itself 11,000 times, that is an argument was like, and some of you know, it's like ages argument, and no longer, people, need to do that or go through that argument anymore, simply because now they know, oh, I know what happened in my previous cycle, and they avoid that particular way of coding altogether. So it's not changing just the performance profile of the code, it's actually changing the behavior of the coding. So now you're injecting the performance capability into your code quality, and now you have much more performant code from the get-go. So as you can see how this changes the dynamic. The other thing that I want to emphasize here is that, you're really setting the bar. And, anything you do, especially in the digital age and the cloud, performance plays a big role in branding. So if your application is slow and people cannot, get to the business that they want to get to fast enough, they're going to be frustrated with it. And God forbid, they're never going to come back and they're going to go somewhere else. So performance becoming a very, very important, especially as we get into more and more into those touch apps, because touching the application is changing the dynamic of performance and the perception of the eye. It's no longer the eye that's looking for the screen to render. Your finger is much more connected to your brain than your eye, because there's that delay between the eye, unfortunately, right, and the brain. And you're actually willing to wait for the page to paint. But look at, you all use some new smartphones. What happens if you touch your smartphone and it doesn't load the app immediately? Next thing you do, you just go ahead and delete it. And it's just because it's not responding to your touch. And your touch is connected to that speed of the brain that you want it to be actually that fast. So, and that's what differentiates you from the rest of your competitors, is how fast your application render. You can have fancy architecture. You can spend a lot of money on the architecture. So you can read this chart whichever way you like, but my translation of this chart is very simple. You're going to pay attention to the performance, and you tip it over to your side, regardless of how fancy of an architecture you have, or what kind of language you're developing your solution in, or where you're putting your app. So that's how I read that chart. But you can definitely have other translations of the chart. So the point here is that performance matters to your brand. Now, how did we get innovative? Why the Dice Race helped us, get more into the innovation world and spend more time doing the work we want to do? It's really simple. It enabled us to develop rapid products and remediate performance issues very quickly. So our code-to-test cycle is shrunk. So developers don't have to wait for the performance team to have enough time for them to test. So they test themselves, and they test it right after they code it. So there's no that delay. Let me wait for the testing engineer to come and test my code. They actually profile it immediately upon the issue. Then they actually check it in with a higher quality. So depth to test is also have increased as well, because when you can developing code, right, you identify those issues and you continuously testing. It's like day after day. It's like you developing testing, and you have faster performance quality that's been pushed out of the code to the testing groups. So the testing groups are focusing on more of a high-level performance testing, such as integration system-wide testing, scalability testing, volume testing, and people like to call it load testing as well. So those are the high-value tasks. That's where the performance teams spend their time on. And of course, it's going to speed your time to market, and you actually have a true DevOps enablement because now your performance cycle all of a sudden is almost, not always, but almost like a formality and final assurance check as opposed to finding all the issues and sending back to development and going back and forth and basically keep repeating that. Very timely consuming. So this tool has given us time back that we really needed and needed badly. So high performance quality, it really gives you time to innovate, because the performance issues, as you all know, they typically are sticky and they take a long time to resolve. So if it takes you a long time to find them, you're doubling or tripling or quadrupling the time to resolution, right, for those issues. So you really have no time to innovate or improve your process or get trained on something you like, right? And of course, you're delaying your release. So, and your competitors are going ahead of you if you don't innovate fast enough. Now, okay, so that's all good talk, right? Now show me the numbers, right? Show me the real value that this tool was able to derive to you and to your team. So that's the question I would ask myself, and that's the question I challenged my team when we first did the POC of the tool, right? And this is the challenge that I actually continue to challenge my team. And I actually, part of the program, I meet with the development community once every 2 months and ask them this question. Show me the real value Dynatrace has given you. I just spent time and money rolling it out. Is it providing you with the value I initially thought it would? And the answers are, really clear. So this quadrant here is going to show you the performance and the productivity metrics of what the tool was able to do for us. So this is something that is typical, right? Most people look at their performance from a response time standpoint. So as you can see, before we start using the tool, before we put this program together, it's not just the tool, it's the program and the capability the tool was able to do for us, and the enablement is much more important. And Dynatrace was the tool to actually enable us to do that. So what we did is we put this chart up there and say, this is what our performance profile will look like. We have some in the red, we have all the yellows, we have a sliver of the green, right? So with Dynatrace, we were able to move the needle and move it significantly. So now most of our response time, for the most part, most of the web transactions that we have, they are in a 2-second range or less. As you can see, that's a huge improvement, right? And we could say that reliably, right, with confidence, without having to say, I don't really know. I've done some tests, and I know we have some in the red, but I didn't test every single transaction, so I don't really know how many. But with this tool, now you have more time to actually include every single transaction in your certification cycle, so you have that level of confidence. The next part of it is the productivity of the team. Before we rolled out the Dynatrace tool, we used to spend a lot of time trying to just discover the defects. So you come into the, as a full release, you come into the performance lab and we go through it, headline by headline, sprint by sprint, release by release, whatever you want to call it, however you develop in products. So week after week, you're just going to continue to do that, and eventually you discover a set of defects. Now, you don't discover them all at the end. You discover them as you go. But the idea here is to communicate to you it takes that long to discover that many defects. At least in the POC we did for the tool, that was the number that we found. With the tool in place, again, the same release, we shrunk that down to about a week and a half. Now, how did we do that? Is simply because the developers did their part, and we and the performance team took that in, and when we run our performance tests, we actually have Dynatrace hooked up to it. And when we have a method that exceeds a certain threshold that we set, we get alerted immediately, and that alert goes to the developer, and they jump right on that. Right? There's no time to wait to discover it, send it back to them, and come back. So the response time between the two teams have improved substantially, and some of the issues were so simple, right? And that's really played a big part into that. And that simple issue used to take us, weeks to find. With the tool, it was no-brainer. You find it immediately. Okay, so more into the value that we realized out of this. One of the big things that I think was really clear to us was the visibility into where the issues are. So this chart here meant to show you the baseline was we knew at some point in the product that we had some issue, and our senior guys, they know there's a defect, but they could not really clearly articulate what the issue is. They know there's a bug. It's a little fuzzy, and that's purposely so done in this chart. We know there's a bug, but we cannot tell you what it is. It's just slow, right? And you know how developers get really frustrated when you go tell them, hey, your code is slow. The natural question and the meaningful question, right, and the fair question is, say, how so? Where the issue is? Tell me, and I can fix it. You cannot tell me it's slow and tell me what it is, right? So with Dynatrace, there was some long-lasting issues. Some they were really lost releases, and I'm talking about a year or more, or 2 years or more of some sort, and we couldn't necessarily articulate what the issue is. With Dynatrace, we were able to kind of shed the light on it, and now we know it's a bug, it's black and red, it has 4 legs and 2 antennas. So you can actually define, okay, it's a SQL, it's this method, it's this Java code, it's this thread that's causing us this particular issue. And it's clearly articulated in the tool with ease. More on the productivity, this is just showing you another view of how we were able to gain productivity by reducing our identification of time identifying defects, and defects time to resolution was quick as well. So that resulted in performance. As you can see, some of the performance that we've had before we had the tool, before we actually start fixing those kind of things, we had some response times. They were 16 seconds and 35 seconds. With the help of the tool, those numbers, now they are a lot less. Now they are significantly better. They're 75 to 90%, 92% better. Now with that, you have a happy customer, right? So that's kind of the value we realize. Now, the other thing that is really critical, I touched on it a little bit in the beginning of the slides, is the collaboration, right? And how the tool was a big enabler of that. Because you could go to the developer and say, I want to collaborate with you, but if you don't give them metrics, if you don't give them facts, they just going to say, I'm sorry, I cannot help you if you can't tell me where the issue is, right? So with the tool, we were able to actually have, again, better and happier engineering experience, and the teams were so happy and excited about working with each other, and now there's no that back and forth, and there's no that your test scenario is incorrect, your script is messed up, right? That has changed. So here is more into the collaboration that we did. So we kind of split the responsibilities. Basically, everybody's responsible for the performance. It's not just the performance team. Development teams need to do their part. And we put this model together. It may work for you guys, it may not, but this is the model that works for us. So all the unit level testing and characterization work is done by developers. And we made it a done criteria for our Azure model. And now, people are obligated, developers are obligated to do their pure path and deliver it to us before they can enter the performance lab. So, and they're doing that happily so because they know they want to get some quality code out there. And no one wants to be dealing with 11th hour kind of scenario in terms of the performance defect just the day before we ship. So those are the things that are really critical to keep in mind, is that developers now are all performance engineers to some degree. They're not doing the high volume performance tests or not, but we are doing that. However, they paying attention. They engineering the performance into their product. So the performance team role at the unit level is that we do selective unit level testing, like the ones that they require, high volume, high transaction concurrency, some difficult and complicated data configuration. They could not configure in their environment. They need more hardware. They need tooling. They need experience. So we still do it for them, but we do it on a selective basis. while we're doing it selectively, we actually teach them how to do it as well, because we want to have more eyes on the performance from the get-go. And the only answer that I could find is developers. That's actually much more suited than any other organization within the enterprise or within the engineering organization, at least, to be able to do that kind of work. So developers are taking this seriously and doing it. So, and we came up with this mantra, if you will. Performance quality is PE's raison d'etre, but more importantly, it is the responsibility of all. And that's the architect, the developer, the product manager. Everybody now knows performance is everyone's responsibility. The performance team is the driving force behind it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for a great presentation, Sultan.
You're welcome.
While you were speaking, we actually received some questions from the audience. I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, you can post them to the Q&A chat or use the Twitter hashtag APMLive. And one of the questions here, do you need to be an experienced engineer to get value out of Dynatrace?
You really don't. You need to be a good developer. And you need to have, to some level, you need to have a passion of delivering high quality to your customers. If you have your customers in mind as you're developing code, and if you're customer focused, and if you're one of those people I mentioned earlier that you get frustrated with slow apps, that's all you need, because the tool is so easy and intuitive to tell you what the issues are.
Great, thank you. Another question, what was the setup and implementation time for the infrastructure that gave you these gains? And on top of that is, what is the time frame to set up for each new software product you develop? And the qualifier there was rough man hours.
For Dynatrace, it was really simple, very, very quick. We were able to install the server of Dynatrace within less than, I would say, half an hour. So if you have the hardware to set it up, right, you set up the server, which is basically the collector of Dynatrace and the database of Dynatrace. Then what you need to do, you need to know where to put the agents. The agents are very simple to install. It's really, all it is 2 Java arguments if you have the license file on the server. And when you reboot your app server, you just inject those 2 Java arguments to your reboot, and you're good to go from that perspective. Once you do that, now you're good to collect data and start profiling. In order to profile, you need to create what's called in Dynatrace system profiles. For example, you need to tell it which server to look at and where the agents are, and it will go and look, and you need to decide which metrics you want to look at. And that's all set up. Some of it is drag and drop, some of it is just drop-down menus. And by default, Dynatrace collects all of that, and it's really up to you which you want to look at. So you want to look at field path, you want to look at hot methods, hot response times, SQL, you want to look at Java code, you want to decode the Java code, or decompile, I should say, the Java code to look what's going on in there if you have an IDE. All of that, you could do it if you're a developer within less than, I would say, a couple of hours. So it's not a lot of man hours investment. Did I answer your question?
Another question is how does Dynatrace compare to some of the other technologies that you've used? What made it different?
So the other technologies that I've used in the past, they were, some of them you need to be a very super, Java developer to really understand what the tool is telling you, and you need to be a super performance engineer. So 2 things, you have to have a lot of development background, and you have to have a lot of performance experience to be able to translate what the tool tells you. For example, YourKit, one tool comes to mind, it gives you a haystack, and to find the needle in the haystack takes you hours and hours. So as compared to Dynatrace, it just highlights the hot method for you. And you click on it, and it's right there in front of you. You don't have to be a Java guy. You don't have to be a super performance engineer. You just go to it, and it's just right in front of your eyes. There are new tools out there in the market, but they don't go to the depth or the breadth of the collection and the data and the accuracy of collection of the data, and they all come with a very costly setup. And when we did the POC for Dynatrace, just to be clear, I set it up with 3 competitors in the space. And I picked Dynatrace for a few reasons. One of them, it was easy to install, easy to configure, and has an overhead on my servers of less than 1%. And it got me speed to resolution a lot faster than the other. So those are the factors that went into the decision making of getting Dynatrace as opposed to any other tool.
Okay, we've got 2 here that are, I don't know if they're from the same person, but somewhat related. One is, how did your team respond to Dynatrace when you first introduced it to them?
There was definitely, my own team actually loved it because they're performance engineers. They want something that speeds their efficiency. Something takes the argument out if your test is wrong and your test script is not in line with the requirement and all that. So my own performance team really loved it, and they really wanted a tool like that to give an objective opinion. The development teams, we initially had some resistance because they didn't see themselves as testers, and we quickly changed that argument. We told them we're not asking you to be testers. We're just asking you to give us quality code. We performance team people do not introduce performance issues into the code. You do. We want you to give us, quality code. And we don't have time to support 500 engineers. So you need to be able to look at it from a different lens and convince them that, well, you're really engineering the performance into your product. And performance is not after the fact. It's not afterthought. It's a feature of your product. And if they see it as a feature, and we were able to actually convince them that this is a feature of your product, then they actually start treating it as such. And then they do everything in their power to ensure that they're delivering on that feature. So what we've been saying and advocating out there, if you give me a log on screen, for example, to drive just a very simple example out there, if you give me a log on, that takes 15 seconds, that's incomplete. But if you give me a log on screen that takes 1 second, that is the feature you just delivered to me, right?
Very good. Here we have another one, Sultan. It's, did you face any obstacles in getting the purchase approval or buy-in from senior management? How did you overcome that?
Of course you're going to get into that. Everybody's watching budget, right? So the way you do that is you do a POC and you show the value. So what we did, we said, look, it's critical, that you need to do performance early in the cycle. And this is going to buy you more time to deliver more to the market, to speed up your development life cycle. So basically what we did, we demonstrated to them by doing the POC with Dynatrace to say, I can speed up your development life cycle, right, by doing this. So, and we showed the value of that in real numbers. And we actually have developers work with us on the POC to show that value. So the first hurdle that you have to come is to really do a POC, get some of your constituents in development to really see the value. Then you take your combined result, right, which you cannot deny those charts that I just showed you about performance and response and productivity, and say, look, if I can shrink down my defect discovery and my performance testing cycle to only a week and a half, right, as opposed to 12 weeks or 6 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever the number is, that's a winning argument. Once they saw those numbers on, from the fact-based POC that we did, there was no argument. It was no-brainer for them to go spend the money on Dynatrace because we just say if you spend this much on Dynatrace, it's going to get you that much, and you do the total cost analysis and the ROI analysis, it was no-brainer. So I didn't really have to go through a lot of that, but I did a lot of upfront work to do the POC and provide the facts.
Great. And do we have another one, Sultan? Do you think this tool would benefit operators who preload third-party applications, or is this more for software development companies?
It's actually for the entire life cycle. I think, one of the things we, as you can see, what we try to do, we started in the performance testing, and we said development needed and production needed. I think in order to really be effective at APM in general, you need to start with development all the way to production and complete the full feedback loop. One big feature of Dynatrace that is a lot of people think of Dynatrace as a development tool or testing tool. I think that's a mischaracterization of the tool. There's a huge, huge elements of Dynatrace that are production in nature, right? For example, monitoring, triggering, and integration with provisioning tools. In my performance lab, for example, today when we have our automation and our continuous integration environment, so what we do, we get the build from development, and automatically it triggers the install, the configure, the test run, and Dynatrace. It monitors the test, and it alerts us if there is a hot method. It's not only us from the team, it alerts the developers there's something going on here in this test. It's a regression test. We should not see those variances that we from last night's build, and it immediately alerts us. So take a step further, right? It's you don't have to monitor on just a hot method, or you could monitor at the box level. You could monitor at the big IP level, at the firewall level, and you could monitor in so many ways. And the beauty of it is also aggregate the data across multiple servers for you. So let's say if you have an infrastructure that have hundreds of servers in there, you could actually deploy your agents on all those servers, and they all come to a common place, and you have a common chart that shows you the problem child, if you will. So it's not just a development tool at all.
Very good, Sultan. I guess that's going to be it for our questions now, and we appreciate it. It's just a great job. We appreciate you sharing your experience.